Hello and welcome back everybody. Today we're gonna talk Eden's Zero because the first chapter was unofficially released earlier today and I read it and I actually really enjoyed it. Now a lot of you may know that this is Hiromashima's next work. If you don't, and maybe you don't care, maybe you're not a Hiromashima fan, which is quite understandable given his previous work. A lot of people didn't like Fairy Tail, so I'm not really gonna blame you if you're one of those people. But me personally, I never really had a big issue with Fairy Tail. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a greatly written series, but I still enjoyed it nonetheless. And because of that, I'm gonna give this series a shot. I've said it in the past that I am going to be giving my first impressions of Eden Zero, and if I like it enough, I will review it on a weekly basis, which I may end up doing because this first chapter actually really spoke to me. Like, it really gave me a good vibe for some reason. It might just be the fact that I'm not really a big hater of Hiromashima. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I'm biased towards him, but I really enjoy his art style. I really enjoy some of his writing to an extent, not in the sense that it's good writing, but I just like the approach he takes to certain things. This chapter gave a really interesting vibe compared to the original chapter of Fairy Tail, which I only read after the fact. Of course, I didn't read Fairy Tail when it first came out, but I did read the first chapter later on, and comparing the two, I mean, you can see some similarities for sure. Like, there's definitely similar points in this chapter and that chapter, but I wouldn't really say it's a ripoff, apart from the obvious art style. I mean, it is his art style, but I feel like he could probably have gone with different character designs and whatnot, but he decided to go with something extremely familiar, something that people will really recognize. In fact, Happy is even in the series by name and characterization. Like, he is a blue cat, he's called Happy, although he's not accompanied by the main male protagonist. In fact, he's accompanied by the female protagonist, so there is some difference going on there. So the main female, let's talk about her. She is a YouTuber, or whatever this social media is called. It is a similar website to YouTube as we know it, and I believe her channel on this website was the Blue Cat channel. So obviously she is one of those people who just love cats. You know, nothing wrong about that. I like cats too, so I'm not really gonna be a hater of her choice in content, but to have a female protagonist with such an interest, it's something that I guess you could say has happened in the past. Like, we had Gentle from My Hero Academia, who also wanted to make videos for a living and gain a popularity, you know, through some rather notorious acts. This is not really the case for Rebecca, as the main female is called. She's just out there to try and increase her popularity on this website. She wants to grow big, as most YouTubers in this day and age wants to do. I mean, they want to grow. I mean, that's just natural. I think everyone who makes content wants to grow bigger, who wants to branch out, you know, and this is exactly the case for her as well. Okay, so let's talk about the male protagonist. He's called Shiki. Now, this name is something that apparently translates to the 4 seasons, I think. So obviously, Hiromashima, he's not really going too much away from his roots. Like, we know from in the past, he's been using Haru and he's been using Natsu, which are 2 of the seasons of the year, but I think Shiki actually means the 4 seasons, so he didn't use another season. Instead, he has decided to name the male protagonist after all of them, which kind of implies, or at least suggests, that this is gonna be his final series, which doesn't have to be the case, of course. I mean, it's the first chapter, like, anything could happen from this point on, but I think it's a fair guess to say that this could be his final work, if it actually works out for him. So unlike Fairy Tail, which was a very fantasy-based, magical world where, you know, wizards came together in a guild and, you know, they went on adventures and whatever, they did jobs to get money, you know, it was a very fantasy-based series. Eden's Zero is not. It is in fact very different. It is a science fiction-based series, but it definitely has some elements that remind you of a fantasy setting. For sure, like, there's no way around that, I think. Especially how they use ether gear, which are kind of like equipment that gives you powers, essentially, as far as I understand it. And in Shiki's case, his power is gravity. That's the power he has. So instead of using your typical fire moves for your main character, Hiro decided that he would want to use a gravity user, and I'm really a fan of this idea. I really wanted to see a main character that uses a gravity power for a long time, and Hiromashima, he's doing it, so I'm really intrigued with this idea. However, you know, just using that power doesn't mean that it's gonna sell me. I'm not necessarily going going to be a fan of this series just because of that. It has to be done right no matter what, of course, but he's definitely taking the right approach so far in order to make me interested and invested in this series. So as I said, it's a very science fiction based series, and you can see this at the end of the chapter, because instead of revolving around, you know, cities and whatever on a continent, it is worlds and space travel. That's really the gist of it. Like, there is space travel going on and you have to travel across planets or stars. I don't really know if I want to call them planets. They do call them planets, but they don't really look like planets. It's more like worlds in space. That's the way I would describe it. It's kind of like islands and whatever that's just floating in space and you travel to them. The female did say they're like star-sized, which they definitely don't look star-sized to me, but you know, maybe their stars and our stars are two entirely different things. Now, as I said previously, there are some things that are familiar with Fairy Tail in this series, and I want to bring that up right away. You have the Demon King idea. You know, just hearing the Demon King, you think E and D, right? Because of the fact that that is something that became a really big thing in Fairy Tail. However, the Demon King is nothing massive, at least from the way that I'm interpreting it. It's not really something that's really huge. It's just a role. It's a name. That's all there is to it. It's actually just a robot, which is named the Demon King because that is the role that robot has been programmed to play, essentially. Another thing that really pops up from Fairy Tail is, of course, dragons. Now, this is really something that isn't really a dragon, but it is a dragon at the same time. It's like mechanical or robotic dragons flying around in space, which from the very early point in the chapter we hear about these dragons, even though they're sort of explained as to be comets to young Shiki, but when he grows up and goes into space, he gets to see that this is actually a dragon. A mechanical one, of course, but a dragon nonetheless. So the dragon element is there, but I don't really know how significant it's going to be. Probably quite significant at times, but whether it's gonna be like this huge thing, I don't know. Probably not, to be honest. I think the series is going to revolve more around traveling across worlds and eventually running into whatever the final antagonist is going to be. You know, meeting new friends along the way, because as we've seen from the cover page, there's quite a few characters we haven't seen yet from the first chapter, so I expect, you know, some new friendly characters, probably some unfriendly characters as well, to pop up in the upcoming chapters. I think very early on they're going to establish what the series is going to be more precisely, because right now we don't really know much apart from the fact that they're going to explore other worlds. That's really all we know at this point. The last comparison I want to make with Fairy Tail is, of course, the parents, because in Fairy Tail you had Natsu Dragneel. We didn't know his biological parents at first. We knew he had like a foster parent, which was a dragon, and then eventually you could consider the guild to be his foster family. But in Eden Zero, it's kind of similar, but it's different. You have this Demon King role, which found Shiki when he was young, apparently, and he took him in, and he became his, I guess, foster grandfather. Obviously, he's not his biological one because of the fact that this Demon King is actually a robot, and Shiki's a human. That's really, I mean, you can't really make a biological link there, right? So obviously he found him, so his parents must have abandoned him at some point or died and he was left alone. You never know. I mean, it's super early to tell. And it's also shonen. Shonens are very known to not really reveal the parents a lot of the time. Like, there are exceptions to this, like Naruto, we had a parents going on. Like in My Hero Academia, we have at least one parent of Deku, but so far in this series, no parents, at least no biological ones. And in Fairy Tail, we do have the parents, but they were only revealed very recently in the manga. Well, I mean, I say recently. It wasn't recently anymore, but, you know, it was in the final arc, essentially. That's what I mean. Now, one of the things that I found to be really interesting, and this isn't really a comparison as much as it is a parallel to Fairy Tail. At the end of the chapter, when they're actually escaping this world or leaving the world, Shiki takes Rebecca to her ship so that she can escape, but she actually drags him along with him. And when you look at Fairy Tail, it's kind of the opposite. Natsu's the one dragging Lucy along, so you have like this parallel of it being reversed, which I find to be really interesting actually, and I really like that. I like how Hiromashima, he puts in these parallels, maybe a bit too many at times, but I still think it's a nice touch. I really do, especially since it's just the first chapter. As long as this doesn't become a trend in every single chapter, I think it's perfectly okay. Like, if this becomes something that we're gonna experience every single chapter that is being released, I think we can be considering this to be a problem. But right now, it's just the first chapter. You could even call it an Easter egg if you want. I wouldn't, but you really could if you wanted to. But yeah, that's really all I had to say on Eden Zero in this video. I just wanted to give my first impressions on this series, and I know it was a lot of comparisons and, you know, parallels between Fairy Tail and Eden Zero, but that's really a good way of interpreting this chapter, because a lot of things were going on. You can recognize some of the elements that really were happening, but then there were some new things as well, of course, like the whole robot thing. I didn't really go too much into the whole robot thing. I don't really want to spoil people who may not have read the chapter when watching this video. I wanted to keep some of it out, really, but I wanted to say as much as I could by spoiling as little as possible, although it's impossible to not spoil anything at all, of course. So there's gonna be some spoilers, but it's not gonna be like a massive amount of them, I think. At least, I hope not. But yeah, I'd love to know what you guys think if you've read the chapter, what you thought of this chapter of Eden's Zero. Did you like it? Because I certainly did. I really enjoyed this chapter. In fact, I think this was one of my favorite first chapters compared to some of the other first chapters we've had recently. I mean, the Orient first chapter was actually really good as well. That's a really tough comparison, like which one was better. A lot of people are obviously going to be biased towards Magi because, well, the Magi creator, because it's the Magi creator. But me personally, I think Eden Zero was just a touch ahead. Not in the sense that it was more original. I just have a better connection to the chapter than I did with the Orient first chapter. So yeah, I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments. And as always, if you did, be sure to Detroit smash that like button if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you haven't already. This has been Chaotic Plus, and remember everyone, Brandish is waifu, Brandish is laifu.